Welcome to Mind Amendment, the podcast that dares to challenge the ways that we think about mental health, physical health, addiction, and healing. We're back for part 3 of 3. I'm sad and happy all at the same time.
It's been a wonderful, wonderful experience, and I hope people have really learned a lot, and I can't wait for what they're going to learn in this one.
Yes, I think, I wasn't going to say it in part 1 and 2 because I wanted people to see part 1 and 2 before they get to part 3, but I think this has the potential to maybe be my favorite part of all 3. So we're going to be talking about dissent, boundaries, and hope. Mental health as a resistance and renewal. That's a lot. So we'll see if we can get all the way through it. But that's the direction we're going with this conversation. And so I just want to kick it off because we've got so much to cover, and I really want to get through it as much as we can in this section. So what is a boundary that changed your life and your mental health for the better?
Ooh. You know, I like to think that my husband is like the king of boundaries because he is very firm in them, and I think it's so incredibly healthy. My family, not so much. My family is very much no boundaries. Everybody's business is everybody's business. And I think, I don't know, it kind of works for us, but it's been really healthy just to have boundaries. Like one of them, though, is so I think my mom, she has a lot of feelings around like health and body and diet. And I think a big consequence of that is like growing up in the 70s and 80s when the diet culture was so big. And I had this point where I just was having a really hard time with my relationship with food. And I just like really couldn't be around, you know, I just like, she's allowed to talk about whatever she wants, right? There's boundaries and there's rules. My ring's in the restroom. 1 second. Or it's over there.
Oh, you're fine. You're fine.
The ADHD fucking...
Wait, does your ring help you focus? Is that
yes.
what? Oh my gosh.
It's a fidget toy.
I'm so there.
My husband knows exactly who he married, so it's like 5 rings together and it just, okay. Sorry.
Can we just address,
Yeah.
I don't know if we are going to clip it out or it's going to be there, but you just did something I really admire. Stopped the show and said, hold on, I need to go get my ring.
Yeah.
And went across the studio to do it because it was what you needed and it was what was going to happen. Tell me about your ring really quick. Because
I absolutely will. Before we get back to boundaries. So it's literally a fidget toy. So when I got engaged, my husband is very thoughtful. Also, his name's Atlas. I should just probably say Atlas. But it has 5 rings. And it was when we were together for 5 years. And so it has this like beautiful like jingle sound. Makes a wonderful impromptu tambourine, but it's also an excellent fidget toy. So I usually like put it on my finger and just like slide it up and down. And it's usually not too intrusive, but it helps me feel very regulated. And so I also don't want to lose it. Yes. And as I've been on this like, you know, unmedicated ADHD journey, I am liable to leave some things behind. And so this one definitely has to come with me. But I think it's important to stop and reset when you need things. And so speaking to that, you know, talking about my mom, she kind of has this like relationship with diet and food where she's like super happy talking about herself in ways and like can just continue, you know, but I needed to heal. And we have such a tradition in my family of my mom cooks. She's an incredible cook. So next time you're in LA, you have to come over for dinner.
Oh, yes.
I think she probably invited you to dinner when she saw you at the Reach LA gala.
I know, and I haven't been back yet. Wait, we were back, but it was for
I won't
anyway,
tell her.
we
It's
didn't
okay.
have to say, I'm coming next time.
Oh, fabulous.
Yes.
But it kind of got out of bounds. And I felt like, you know, I can't be around. I can't have like a peaceful dinner if you're going to talk about like size, if you're going to like criticize everybody who comes on TV or yourself or and it was tough, but I think sometimes you have to heal things. You have to like really recognize what you need and then try to speak that. And there's a difference between boundaries and rules, right? A rule is something that you might set for somebody else. A boundary is what you do for yourself. So my boundary was to remove myself from that situation until we could have like, can we have dinner where we don't talk about size or we don't talk about food negatively? And like, that's our aspiration. My boundary is I'm going to remove myself from that situation until we can do that, you know, and try to balance those things, not making it feel too much like a rule. Like I don't want to police what my mom's talking about, but trying to help her understand like, this is what I need to feel comfortable in my body. So that was really important. But I find a lot of the most important boundaries that I set, because my family is so close, is sometimes deviating a little bit from boundaries, sometimes feeling like you have to compromise a little bit. And I've also had to realize like what boundaries are important and what boundaries aren't. Can I speak to that just really quickly?
Yes,
I'm trying to
please.
keep the conversation concise.
And my pause was because very pensive there.
You're like, more's there.
Yes.
So when I got married, I was like, I don't want my dad to walk me down the aisle because I feel like that's very patriarchal tradition. Like, he's not giving me away to anyone. We're not doing that. So I had the conversation with my dad. My dad was like, oh, I completely understand. Makes total sense. Whatever you need. The day of the wedding. I feel like our ceremony started at noon and my dad called me at like 11 and he was like, all right, well, I'll wait for you at the top of the aisle. I think my dad genuinely forgot that I didn't want him to walk me down the aisle. And he was so excited about it. Oh. And so he did. And I felt like, for me, and this depends for people. Like, I think some people, the idea of doing something that your dad asked you to do that you didn't want to do would be really confronting and difficult. But for me in that moment, I realized, okay, well, this is a milestone in my life, maybe as much as it is a milestone in my dad's life, because I'm the first one of his daughters to get married. And like, he might have a picture of what it means to be a man. And, you know, he's 75, you know, this year. And so I was like, you know what, I'm gonna let that go. And I think that's been a really important thing too, is that like, I can't be too dogmatic about what my perspectives are, not to say I lose myself or I change my values, but to sometimes recognize that somebody else, that you're part of somebody else's story too. And sometimes it's really not that deep.
Well, and that was could I be so bold as to say, or suggest that you analyzed and realized that that was a boundary that in that moment that you could let go. It wasn't something that compromising was going to harm you, your existence, your future, your way of being. And it could preserve an element of your relationship and, in fact, potentially nurture it. And
it was so beautiful. And like, I just think it was so wonderful. And so I think the difference there, right, is like the boundary with my mom, that's breaking a pattern. Like, how can we move forward where mealtime isn't body bash time, isn't toxic relationship with food time? And then with my dad, it was like, okay, well, you know what? It turns out I care about this kind of, I guess, milestone in my dad's life more than I care about the optics of what looks patriarchal and what doesn't. And I think that also constantly renegotiating your boundary, like sometimes you can, I like what you said, analyze and realize. So I analyzed and I realized and I decided that it wasn't going to be harmful to myself or my future, my livelihood, and that I could adapt. And it was really beautiful.
I love that. I think it's so key. Adaptability is really important. If we're going to invest all this time in creating, you know, I love that you separated, this is a rule, this is a boundary, because 98% of all of us, and me and both my hands are raised, I get it twisted on a daily basis.
I mean, I do it too, because I think our society is a big impact of that. We have a lot of rules in our society, and boundaries, it's kind of what we need from interactions and how we can conduct ourselves in order to protect ourselves versus what society needs. I really want to do a Smarter in Seconds on that topic with Dr. Raquel, because she talks about boundaries in such an incredible way that it really helps like illuminate what you might be missing, what you might need. And she also keeps it so real, which is refreshing.
I love that. Okay. What did you learn? Sorry, let me say that again. How did you learn that leaving or letting go could be a form of healing?
Ooh. Let's talk about that. So in episode 2, I talked about my boyfriend that I had. I think that was another example of boundary setting. Was for us, what ended up kind of disrupting the relationship, and honestly for the better for both of us. I think we're much happier than we would have been together. Was that racial justice was really important to me. And I was learning that all through the course of college, because that was kind of the rise of Black Lives Matter in 2013, and really realizing that, you know, there's a lot of changes we need in this country to help everyone feel like they can have a part of the American dream. And that was so disruptive for him because he didn't grow up feeling like America didn't work out for him. And in many ways, I didn't either. But I think through the course of going through college and learning so many different stories, I realized that's not true for everyone, and I really care about that. We were on vacation, and there was, you know, a very televised situation of violence, racial violence, and I didn't want to go out to eat that night. And he was like, "Why do you care this much?" And we realized we have totally different values when it comes to this. Like, to me, I don't even have an appetite anymore because I just witnessed something so terrible. He felt so disconnected from that situation that he was like, well, let's keep it, like, you know. And so I think in that form of healing, sometimes you have to set a boundary in relationships with people. And sometimes that boundary might look like not having the relationship anymore because your values are so dramatically different. And I think it's really important to establish that early on. I know so many people who, I remember when I lived in New York, there was a shouting match between a couple about who voted for who. And like one person, you voted for Hillary, you voted for Trump. And they're both extremely mad. I'm like, how did you get that far in the relationship? How are you making out with someone you don't know how they're going to vote? Like, that's crazy to me. But I think I'm very like plugged in. I'm very woke, as some would say.
You are?
So much so. But yeah, no, it's, there's this documentary about le wokisme in France. That's what they call it the wokeism, but I think it sounds le wokisme. It sounds so fancy. French is so chic. They put me in the documentary and I can't even understand it because I don't speak French, but literally in the documentary about wokeness. But I think it's so important to share values. And sometimes if you have a change in your life or a change in your circumstance where you have to create a boundary so that you can be better, healthier, create your amendment to your personal constitution. I'm going to take that one with me.
Yes.
You might need to create a boundary to have better circumstances. So for some people in their sobriety journey, it might be like not being able to go to a bar with their friends. It might be like, hey, I actually can't participate in happy hour. I don't care if how it makes me look. This is what I need to be healthy. And so sometimes leaving a situation, it's so powerful. And I'd like to share one more story if I can.
Yes.
I was having the worst conversation ever. I was at South by Southwest, so you already know. And there's this guy, and he was saying the most outlandish stuff. And I was just sitting there and I was not enjoying myself. This is not somebody I knew. It was like small talk, but the small talk was off the rails. And I was like, I just looked and I was like, so sorry, sir. I'm not really enjoying this conversation. I'd love to step away. And that way maybe we can both talk to people that were more suited to chat with. And then I walked away. And it was maybe the first time I'd ever done that. And I was like, this is great. More of that. But it like opened my third eye because I was like, oh my goodness, we can just leave a circumstance that we don't like, whether it's a long-term relationship or not. Like if you're having a short interaction with somebody and they're just, you can go. And I remember I called my husband and I was like, I just left the conversation. I wasn't enjoying it. And it was great. And he was like, I do that all the time. Welcome to the world. But it was just like so new to me. So boundaries can be little, but they can also be big.
Yes. That's so true. I was just going to go down this rabbit trail. I'm going to say this really fast on this subject. Somebody was just talking to me about how I need to watch Love on the Spectrum because there's so many great examples of exactly what you just talked about, of empowerment of these people on the spectrum that experience life through a different lens, where a common thread that's observed is this ability to detach from, or not being attached in the beginning of
to like social
caring that that it might be awkward to you if I'm just like this isn't fitting for me, so I'm gonna get up.
So my husband's actually autistic, and so I feel like that's a big part of
that's why you said for
and
okay.
it's like, and I feel like that's a big factor in how we kind of conduct it, because that's kind of automatic for him. Like if he's not enjoying something, he's just gonna like, well, I'm going to communicate that I'm not enjoying this and then do something else, always courteous, always very kind. But I think it's also like very healing, especially when you look at like people pleaser personality. Oh, don't worry. I'm also called out when I made my Smarter in Seconds on people pleasing, which I think I'm going to redo for the summer. So many people were like, stop calling me out. But that can be healing too, because sometimes people pleasing doesn't serve you. Most of the time it doesn't serve you, and it doesn't serve the people that you're around because it's not your most authentic self.
Very true.
This podcast is brought to you by Promises Behavioral Health. If you or a loved one are struggling with trauma, addiction, or mental health, we are ready to answer your questions and help you take that next step. Call our admission center at 888-648-4098 or visit us online at www.promises.com. Our team is ready and waiting to answer the call for help.
Speaking about authenticity and just moving towards that direction of what your new reality is, how do you define emotional safety today?
Ooh, I think emotional safety is like, when you're with and around people where you can be messy, but without being destructive. Because I think sometimes people think messy and they think somebody throwing something across the room. That is messy, but it's not what I'm talking about. Because emotional safety is like having the structures within your life and within your relationships and within yourself to be able to talk about emotions, express emotions, feel emotions, process them in real time in a way that's positive. I remember I had a conversation with Atlas once, and we both just kind of needed to yell it out. And we don't often yell, like that's kind of like a rule we have, which is like to not yell. And our boundaries, like if we're in a pace of like yelling, then we'll remove each other or, remove ourselves from the conversation. But I was just like, this fucking sucks. And he's like, yeah, it fucking sucks. Okay, well, I feel better now. And I think that's an example of emotional safety, because it's like, I'm not going to be looked down upon for that. I'm not going to be mischaracterized for that. I'm going to be seen in my full spectrum of emotional range and be able to express that. And I think emotional safety too has to do a lot with, it has so much to do with mental health, because it's sometimes we don't schedule emotions. It'd be very nice if I could schedule my anxiety for 7 a.m. through 8 p.m. when I'm still asleep, 8 a.m. when I'm still asleep. 7 a.m. through 8 p.m. is usually more so how it goes. But I think emotional safety is to know, like, for example, for me, I haven't had a panic attack. I think I had a panic attack this year. But I had like one. That's huge for me, because I think I was in such a state of emotional unsafety that I would bottle up my emotions. So instead of like kind of processing something in real time, it would all compound, and then I'd be on the floor of my bathroom absolutely sobbing, trying to like come out of a state. And the emotional safety of it is being able to like have that full spectrum, but then also if I do have a panic attack, not being down on myself about it, like being like
removing the shame no matter what,
absolutely.
Whether it's from yourself or the other person.
It's everything.
Yeah.
Because like learning new things, if we add shame and guilt to it, it's paralyzing and it stops us from being able to get to the point. And in the context of emotional safety, it's just the ability to feel and to be human. Because humans, we are emotional skeletons.
So true. Well, and so you, as we're giggling and laughing about this right now, because it's so like we can find the humor in experiencing that full spectrum of emotions. We have to be able to experience the sadness, the whole spectrum, to get to my favorite, which is joy. So I want to know, what is your joy practice, and why does joy matter for mental health in your perspective?
So I have joy practices and I have gratitude practices, and they're so connected because I find a lot of joy from like being grateful and thankful. I think a bit of that comes maybe from a religious standpoint, from an Islamic standpoint. But my joy practice is like, okay, so I was in Nashville for, I think, I arrived yesterday, I leave today. My like suitcase is in the studio. I'm gonna take my makeup off before I get on the plane. But I also went to a rock concert, while I had a few hours in town. And I think that's what the joy practice looks like, is like making time for fun. Did that have anything to do with getting anyone free? No. Did it teach anyone anything? Absolutely not. But was it fun? Yes. And I think I had such a hard time when I first went viral of like, okay, well, I don't know if it was when I first went viral on Instagram, but when I went viral on Twitter, like earlier in my 20s, I felt such a responsibility for everything I did to like mean something and to be important and make a statement. So I neglected a lot of myself, because I was like, well, why would I care about fashion? Or why would I care about getting my hair done or putting on makeup or getting my nails done? Because it's fun and it brings joy. But at the time I was like, that's not helping anyone. If I'm getting a manicure, that's not saving the world. And that's believe it or not, you probably already know this, but it was kind of a egotistical way of looking at everything. Like, not every action we take moves the needle.
Right.
That's just part of life, baby. Like, you're not going to move the needle with every single action you take, but some of them should, but it's okay to take a nap. It's okay to have fun. It's okay to go to a rock concert, and to have experiences. And so I think that's what my joy practice looks like. And a big part of it has been spending time with my nieces and nephews, because, my 6-year-old niece, she'll just come in and like after school and just ask us the most adorable existential questions. She'll be like, why do people steal? Why do people grow? Why do adults get so tired? And like questions like that. And we'll look them up and we'll discuss them. And I think that's really joyful too, because you get to see somebody changing and growing in real time. As adults, we're constantly changing and growing, but when you see it in kids, it's so much more visible.
Because of how rapid and extreme they're...
One week you'll talk to them, and they don't know how to swim. The next week they know how to swim. It's incredible. But we have to remember that we have that resilience too. And that's really joyful as well.
I wish my skin cells had that.
That collagen, that elasticity.
Okay. What does healing in public mean to you, and how do you manage the weight of that.
So healing in public. I feel like when I hear that, I think of the people. So there was one time, I feel like, I don't know, 2016, it became like very like chic to like cry and then post like a black and white selfie on Instagram. I tried that. It did not resonate with me. So I feel like, one, realizing that healing in public doesn't look the same. It doesn't mean you post your crying selfies. It means you can if you want, but it doesn't, there's not like one way to do it. And I think for me, healing in public has meant, so I grew up going to therapy. Like that was a big part of my upbringing, partially because my parents work in mental health. And I think that that meant that I was going through a lot of trauma at school and a lot of exclusion at school, and then going to therapy and dealing with it there. And I think that's important, and it has its place. I also think it's really important for like us to look at when you get hurt in public, maybe somebody says something hurtful or mean, you can also address it there and with those people instead of just kind of squirreling that away to therapy time. Because we can't always do that, but in the circumstances where we can, it's so important. And I had a friend, Malcolm, who's an incredible filmmaker, and I need to offline with you about his latest film. You're going to love it. Oh my gosh. But anyway, actually, I guess I can talk a little bit about it. It's called Drugs Are Fun. And it's about, it's contrary to the title, but they just won an award for Cannes for the short film.
Awesome.
And it's produced by his fiance, Novi Brown, who's a very close friend of mine. And I was so impressed with the film because it has such a modern, necessary approach for looking at the drug epidemic with young kids and how it's so intertwined with nightlife and the club scene and everything like that. And I know Malcolm to be such a compassionate person, but sometimes when he would make jokes, it would really like unnerve me and really make me feel like, you know, it was really traumatic, like triggering for me for the trauma I had experienced, nothing that had to do with Malcolm directly. And instead of and like one time I saw him and I didn't really want to give him a hug. And it's okay to not want to hug your friends, but we're usually very close. We're usually like, oh man, it's so good to see you. And then he was like, Blair, are you okay? And I was like, no, you know, when you made that last joke, it really made me feel a type of way. And we were able to have a conversation about it. And I think that's what healing in public looks like, is like having people, and it also goes to the emotional safety of like being able to be sad or disappointed in front of your friend and talk about those things. So that way we can heal. And then when he, you know, takes us to his screening for his film, I can like show up as my fully enthusiastic self because I'm not, you know, harboring resentments. And I think that the huge case for doing the healing in public is that otherwise you end up having resentments. Otherwise you end up building up this kind of like nest of traumas and hurt, instead of just kind of releasing it.
Well, and then both people end up playing off of each other because he picks up on it, then starts acting different, and then it might even be worse, and then
the friendship deteriorates when you could have just had a conversation. And I think sometimes when people think healing in public, they think it needs to be big and dramatic, but sometimes it can just be like, hey, when you did that, it made me feel shitty. Could you not do that anymore? And then them having a conversation. And that's really how it went. And then we were fine. I could also, but we live in such a individualistic society, so it's, I think, really hard for people to look at healing in public, but you see it all the time. Sometimes it'll happen between friends when, you know, after like a football game and they're in like a heightened state of emotion and they're able to hug it out and be like, oh yeah, and by the way, I'm really sorry I did that. Well, thank you for saying that. But not everybody has that awareness. So sometimes healing in public looks like communicating to the people that you love what you might need in terms of moving forward so that you can.
Yeah. I have about 89 other questions that I wanted to...
I'll keep them short.
No.
Smarter in seconds, every single one.
I know, right? No, that was not it. What I wanted to say, though, is that like I knew I wasn't going to be able to get to everything that I wanted to talk about. But what I do want to ask you is, because, you know, this is by the time this episode's airing, we're going to be closing out Mental Health Awareness Month. And, you know, everywhere we look, things are, 5 tips for this. And you've got a psychiatrist commenting on what's the best practice for blah, 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 whatever. And, you know, when you and I were talking about doing this series for Mental Health Awareness Month, it was so important for me because you're an educator. Now, are you a licensed mental health professional?
Licensed nowhere but on Instagram.com.
But where...
Oh, you said a licensed mental health professional?
Right.
Oh, I am not. No.
Right.
And I would never purport to be. And I get really frustrated with people who pretend that they are.
Well, my point here is that so many people get our information and our sound bites from individuals who are on social media, who are doing exactly what you're doing, whether it's makeup tutorials, whether it's this, whether it's that. And you are a wonderful example of someone who has been a student, not only from the work you did in school, but continue to be a student in life and been responsible with your passions and what you feel called to do. And it's not only been obviously rewarding, but to you, but to the public as well. And I see what you're doing as something that is a wave of affecting people when we talk about mental health in a way that is not like, I'm not talking about depression, anxiety, panic attacks, blah, 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 this or that, even though you do talk about those things in Smarter in Seconds. I'm talking about all of it collectively and the way that you approach amending the constitution of one's mind and why we would do it. It's jumping outside of the clinical box. Mm-hmm. What? I mean, like, really, like, for so many people, and especially the audience for this show, you got a bunch of therapists going like either hallelujah or well, because
I think an example of that is when I worked with Dr. Raquel Martin, who I was talking about earlier, and I was talking about how I talk about mental health more on a social media and public perspective than how she might in a clinical perspective, as we went back and forth on our Google Doc about a lot of people think that, feel that disorder is a really negative term because of, the like how it's pathologized
Yes.
and stuff. And so a lot of people feel condition is a much more neutral term to discuss mental health conditions. And so, but a lot of the language is about mental health disorders. And so we had a conversation, Dr. Raquel Martin and I, about like, okay, well, how can we bridge these things where we're being accurate? And so we just added a little addendum that's like, usually in clinical context, these are diagnosed as mental health disorders, but many people feel that condition is more neutral. So we just added both of the conversations. But I think for me, it's the reminder of like, I always have to have citations, especially if I'm not including a mental health professional, and even when I am, because it's really important for people to know where they're getting the source information from. It's so important to normalize conversations of mental health without us treating the term bipolar as a colloquialism. Mm-hmm. It's so important to talk about normalizing and people understanding the signs of clinical depression without people conflating that with feeling sad at a time. And so I always view myself as an educator as being in conjunction with those folks, but there are a lot of people who will just traffic in misinformation and say the most absurd things online. And then you'll have some people being like, well, that's the first I've heard of it, I guess it's correct. So now in Smarter in Seconds, I think I've been doing it for the past 3 years, is I usually would put, I think, the citations in the caption, but then people would repost it without the citations. And I'm like, oh no, we need validation for this claim. And so now what I do is I put the citations on screen, and that helps a lot. One, it helps with my credibility, it helps with the audience's understanding and retention. But one thing I realized when I started making videos is that not everyone's going to like my stuff, but at least my stuff will be accurate. And I can just demonstrate my accuracy by citing everything. So I'm a big proponent of that.
Clearly. And I just love, rolling on with our theme of amending the mind and being adaptability. You have continued to share with us about how you have pursued that. You've embraced tenacity, all of these things that I love to talk about on both my podcasts, but especially this one. And it's just, this interview has been such a great example of all of these pillars that we're speaking about. And if there's anything that I could do is encourage people to go follow Blair. All her stuff is going to be linked below on every single one of these episodes. And you will not be sorry. And you're going to go down a rabbit hole and you're going to walk away being like, you're going to have conversations for years, like material for conversations for years, because of how much you're going to learn so easily and so quickly.
And I appreciate that so much. And can I tell you, that was a big part of how I thought I would make friends growing up, was if I just read every little encyclopedia fact book and I knew about every little thing, I could have a conversation with anyone and then everyone would love me.
Yeah.
Didn't really work in middle school, worked great in adulthood.
And here we are. Oh my gosh. Well, this has been absolutely lovely. And you know, we're going to have to do a part, whatever number we're going to call it, again, maybe we come in and do a film sprint out in LA.
Absolutely.
We've got so much.
This is fantastic.
We've got so much more that I want to touch on with you. And I think like you are just this wealth of knowledge and a ray of sunshine, and this world is so very much better for having you in it. So thank you for being who you are. I'm so grateful that when you were a youngster and your parents answered the call and took you in the moment that you needed to get the help that you needed. You know, you referenced in episode 1, all the things that led you to continuing to love yourself, stay alive, learn more, enjoy life, pursue your passions, and then also make other people's lives different. That's what it's all about.
Thank you so much, Patrick.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for your tireless commitment to helping people through addiction and recovery and mental health, because it's so important and we need it.
Yeah.
And a lot of people write folks off.
Yeah.
And people are always redeemable. People are always worthy of healing. People are always worthy, period. And you live that every day.
Thank you. Last question. Do you have any homework or challenge final for our audience for your parting thoughts? Did I just stump Blair Imani?
You did. Let's see. I mean, I could just be cheesy. I think, okay, so there's this exercise that I came across recently, and it was like, how do you feel when you say your own name out loud? And so I think that's something really interesting to journal about. Sometimes people say their name out loud and they feel like, oh, it doesn't really belong to them. Sometimes they say it out loud and they feel like their parents scolding them. Sometimes they say it out loud and they're like, oh, I like my nickname better. I don't really relate to that. And I think it's a really fundamental place to start when it comes to self-understanding, because all this other work, negotiating how we show up in the world, how we can, be more mentally prepared, how we can be more emotionally safe. I think it all starts with a healthy sense of self. That's what I did. That's the exercise I start with in my book, Read This to Get Smarter. It starts with our names, who we are, how we understand ourselves. And it goes into, from there, conversations about relationships and class and disability and race and gender. But it also has to start from a sense of self. So I would say, try saying your name out loud to yourself and see how you feel.
I love that. And I'm going to do it. Thank you, Blair.
Thank you, Patrick.
This has been wonderful.
This podcast is brought to you by Promises Behavioral Health. If you or a loved one are struggling with trauma, addiction, or mental health, we are ready to answer your questions and help you take that next step. Call our admissions center at 888-648-4098 or visit us online at www.promises.com. Our team is ready and waiting to answer the call for help.